Hi guys, welcome back to another Nerd Rants. We are finally back with the second half of Psalms. Yeah, got distracted there for a couple weeks, but that's fine. That's fine. We're back. We're going to finish up book 4 and 5 of the Psalms, which is Psalm 90 to Psalm 150. Yeah, I will try again to keep this at a reasonable length, so that's not just ridiculous. But anyway, I'll just get straight into it with the final stretch of the Psalms. Right out of the gate, I guess I see in Psalm 90 verse 4, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day, and that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. And just this crazy reminder of how like God is outside of time, and the idea of infinity and forever and eternity, and this crazy idea that is really impossible to wrap our heads around as human beings that are stuck inside of time. So it's just this mind-boggling idea that 1,000 years of our lives, 1,000 years of human history is like a single day to God, like a single couple-hour watch in the middle of the night when, you know, you're guarding a camp or a city. It's just crazy, and eternity is one of those things that I don't think I'll ever be able to wrap my head around until I am in it. And I had a conversation about this with a girl at camp, and she was just like, eternity, and it's like this whole conversation, and I really summed it up and just like, I have no idea. It's something I can't wrap my head around. It's something I can't even fathom, because I am trapped inside of a finite world with very minimal finite life, and it's just crazy. So yeah, time is nuts. And just ahead of that in verse 2, it has it's talking about God being the dwelling place for believers throughout all generations, and has that term from everlasting to everlasting. You are God. And again, just the idea of eternity, of forever, infinite, beyond time. It's just crazy and impossible to comprehend as finite human beings. And then still in Psalm 90 kind of centers on the idea of God is everlasting and we are not. So verse 12 and verse 15 kind of harp on our finite days. So verse 12 is, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom, which is that idea of realizing we are finite, we have limited days, so take advantage of all of the days that you are given. And then verse 15, make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. And that's, finding joy in the suffering. And it's interesting in this mindset of, and I think leading off with the mindset of God is everlasting, God is eternal, and then harping on how limited our time is, and then bringing in the idea of finding joy in the suffering for the days that we are afflicted, for the trouble that we see in the years, because we are finite, time is finite, and God is eternal. And so putting it in that order, I think, is very smart, and it brings this encouragement into and weight behind the words of be glad for as many days as you have afflicted us. It's just, the order of things is so clever. It's also really fun just going through this. The number of times in the Old Testament in general, but also specifically in the Psalms, because it's like David writing, and he was a shepherd, how often people are likened to sheep and a flock and like the people of his pasture and all of that, and God being referred to as a shepherd. And it's interesting to see that theme play out through the entirety of the Bible, but it's especially cool to see it come from David, who is intimately aware of the role of a shepherd and how a shepherd does his job, and the like benefits of a good shepherd versus the consequences of a poor shepherd. It's one really cool to see this theme that Jesus harps on a lot in the Gospels, like calling himself the Good Shepherd and all of that, follow through from the Old Testament all the way through to I believe all the way to the end of the Bible, and seeing that, but also specifically from the perspective of a shepherd, of a boy who was very aware of all of that role entailed. And Psalm 98, verse 2 and 3 is one of those verses that doesn't necessarily directly tie to Jesus, but one that I read through, and that was the connection that my brain made. So verse 2 and 3 are, the Lord has made his salvation known and revealed his righteousness to the nations. He has remembered his love and his faithfulness to Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. And because Jesus came to be the salvation of the world, and to reveal the righteousness of God on earth to the nations. And because of Jesus and his sacrifice, not only were the Israels allowed to be saved, but so were the rest of humanity, even to the ends of the earth. So that's like the connection my brain made as I was reading through those verses. And then in Psalm 101, the second half of verse 3, because the way it's spaced in here, it's like two different verses of like a song, so it splits in the middle of verse 3. And so the second half of verse 3 says, I hate what faithless people do, I will have no part in it. And I love the way it's phrased, because I went on a rant about this in I think the second part of my Christian movie Rants, about how I try to intentionally phrase how I talk about sin in general, but specific sins that are kind of that I'm kind of passionate about and that I really like digging into and getting in rants over, and I try to very intentionally phrase the way I say things so that I'm not necessarily condemn, like I'm not saying I hate the person, I'm saying I hate this act and this thing that they're choosing to do. And I try to be very active about that, because in using my words, like being intentional with my words and how I use them, I believe that helps with my mindset and my perspective of the thing in reality, and helps me hold on to that idea of separating the person from the sin. Instead of being like, I hate transgenders, I hate the homosexuals and all that, instead of phrasing it in a way where I'm saying that I hate the person or I condemn the person, basically I try to word it in a way where I am basically condemning the sin but not the sinner. It's probably the best way to put it. So I like how the distinction that it has here in Psalm 101 of saying I hate what faithless people do. He's not saying that he hates faithless people, he's saying I hate what they do, and I will have no part in it. So just that distinction of he is condemning the sin and not the sinners themselves, which I think is very interesting and a very good intentional way of keeping that godly perspective of humanity and sin. Again, lots of pictures and statements and declarations of who God is, which is just very cool to go and read through. I will reiterate that I highly recommend just reading through the Psalms. Ooh, and Psalm 104, verse 27. All creatures look to you to give them their food at the proper time. And it goes into a whole section about God's provision for creation. But I just loved that first verse. It's like all creatures, which includes us as created beings. I went through a whole little logic diagram thing to basically illustrate my thought process. It was very unnecessary, but it was very fun. But all creatures, which includes all of creation, meaning humans, animals, the earth itself, look to God to give them their food at the proper time. And so that dependence that we have on God, because we look to Him to give us our food. And that may not be like a literal thing for us, in especially America, where we make money and we can buy our own food and blah, 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 that kind of thing. So it's very, the mindset of, go provide for yourself and whatever else. So it's not necessarily that super immediate thing or like literal thing for us in like Western culture, where we're very well off and able to, in a sense, provide for ourselves. But that reminder of our dependence on God, not necessarily like in the case of food. I mean, you could walk down the line and be like, you get food because you have money because you have a job, and who gave you that job? Because you can put some of that on your own skill and whatever else, but like as a Christian, inevitably, you are blessed with that job because of God. And so therefore, indirectly, He is responsible for providing you with food. But I think a more relevant, maybe, interpretation for us as Christians in Western culture is not necessarily like literal physical food, but that spiritual food, and that feeding our spirits and our souls versus feeding our bodies. Like, yes, He is responsible for blessing us with the ability to work, to make money in order to buy food, but the more immediate and relevant thing behind that, I think, is that spiritual feeding and that spiritual replenishing, for whether that be energy, patience, peace, those kinds of things. And we look to Him for all of those blessings and all of that spiritual food and that spiritual replenishing when we need it at the proper time. And that the proper time, again, reiterates the God's timing versus our timing. Since He is infinite, He has perfect timing versus we are finite, so we tend to get impatient. And so looking to God, and it almost for those things, but in His timing, not our own time, at the proper time, not what we believe is the right time. So that was longer than I thought it would be, but like, I really, really enjoyed that verse, and it stuck out to me a lot, and that reiteration of our dependence on God for the provision in our day-to-day lives. Like that's another thing behind food. Like, we need food every single day. And so it's not just provision in the hard times or in like the long suffering and things like that. Is literally, we trust in Him to provide us with daily needs at the proper time. So just, I don't know, I really like the verse, and I had it on a sticky note at my desk at work in the short time period that I was sitting up there welcoming families in the morning. It was just chilling out in a sticky note. One that definitely reminded me of like the whole trials and like crucifixion of Jesus was Psalm 105 verse 18 and 19. They bruised His feet with shackles, His neck was put in irons, till what He foretold came to pass, till the word of the Lord proved Him true. And it's not quite as paralleled to Jesus' crucifixion crucifixion as some of the other verses that I found in here, but the whole idea of they bruised him and they captured him and they did all of those things, and then what he was saying would happen, his crucifixion and his rise from the dead, it happened and it proved him true. So I don't know, but again, connections my brain makes that aren't necessarily theologically accurate, but they're the connections my brain makes, and considering that the Bible is all centered around Jesus and everything in the Bible points to Jesus, points to God, I say it can be accurate. Or I guess I think it can be accurate. That's a better phrasing of that. And then Psalm 106. I want to jump to verse 23. And this is another one where my brain makes the connection back to Jesus. So he said he would destroy them, had not Moses, his chosen one, stood in the breach before him to keep his wrath from destroying them. One, I love the wording of that. It's so cool. Just literally, he stood in the breach before him, before God, to keep his wrath from destroying them. It's incredible wording, and that entire second half of that verse, where it's starting with his chosen one and going on to the end of that verse, is just exactly what Jesus did for us. And I go through this verse and I have this imagery. So, back in Lent, I was sharing all of these animations and whatever else from the channel Full of Eyes, which I'll link them in my description again because their animations are wonderful. But the first one their animation I ever saw from them was Set Your Eyes on Him, which is the one I shared on Good Friday. It's become a tradition that I share that one on Good Friday. And I watched that in youth group once, and it has this imagery of Jesus hanging on the cross and this giant ball of fire representing God's wrath literally coming down on him, but Jesus is raised above like all of the people, and so the wrath hits him first and it just stops and it comes down solely on him. And so it's this amazing imagery, and I'm reading through that verse just imagining that imagery, and it's so good. It's insane, and I just love how I now can go through the Old Testament as an adult now versus a child who doesn't necessarily have the brain capacity to make all of these connections, and going through and seeing how everything points to Jesus and points to God, and just the cohesiveness of the Bible all the way through. They're further cementing the accuracy and all of the I don't know what word I'm looking for, but the wholeness of the Bible. I love it. All right, we made it to book 5, Psalm 107 to Psalm 150. I forgot how much I had underlined in book 5. Psalm 118, verse 22, the stone the builders rejected has become this cornerstone, which, alludes to Jesus. And then followed up in verse 23 with, the Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a rant to go with that one, actually. Okay, this one might be a stretch. This is another one Jesus connection. So it might be a stretch, and it requires a little footnote, alternate translation, so not necessarily the NIV translation for it, but I think it's cool. So it's still 118, and then the second half of verse 27. We'll just read the whole verse. So verse 27, the Lord is God, he has made his light shine on us. And the second half is, with bows in hand, join in the festal procession up to the horns of the altar. Okay, the second half doesn't make any sense in relation to God with the NIV translation, but there's a little footnote that is, because I have little footnotes talking about kind of how some alternate translations word it. So the alternate translation is, with boughs in hand, bind the festal sacrifice with ropes and take it to the horns of the altar. Now do you see my Jesus connection there? It's a stretch. It is a stretch, and it requires a not NIV translation. But I thought it was I thought it was cool. 119. It's like 176 verses. Ooh, 119 verse 11 is the I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you verse, which is another one I think that we all know, at least that we all, like, as Christians kind of know, but I don't think most of us know the reference. So that is 119 verse 11. This one talks a lot about like prayer for understanding within God's word and God's law, which is just a prayer I try to have every time I read the Bible. Just this idea, like, open my eyes to that I may see the wonderful things in your law, cause me to understand the way of your precepts, that I may meditate on your wonderful deeds, and just this, or direct me in your path, in the path of your commands, for there I find delight. And just this constant reiteration of, help me understand your ways, help me understand your word, because I take delight in your statutes, in your commands, in your laws. And so it's a very constant theme in Psalm 119, at least for a lot of, for like verses, isn't like song verses, not Bible verses, because it's divided into a verse for each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, acrostic poem, stanza. That's the word I'm looking for. Stanza for each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's a driving theme in a lot of the stanzas of Psalm 119. There's also a lot of talking about, like, I don't know if it's the importance or the holiness of like God's word and God's statutes. So verse 64, the earth is filled with your love, Lord, so teach me your decrees. It is good that, verse 71, it was good for me to be afflicted so that I might learn your decrees. Verse 75, I know, Lord, that your laws are righteous, and that is in faithfulness you have afflicted me. Verse 88, in your unfailing love preserve my life, that I may obey the statutes of your mouth. And then 93, I will never forget your precepts, for by them you have preserved my life. And then 103, how sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. We'll go into 104, I gain understanding from your precepts, therefore I hate every wrong path. Also Psalm 105, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light on my path. So just reiterating the importance and like the purpose of God's word. Psalm 119 is actually really good. It is a mammoth to when you look at it, and like as a thing, I looked up because I was trying to read like a psalm at each like Bible reading time. So I'd read one in the morning before work and then read one at night before I went to bed, and that's kind of how I was doing it. And then I got to 119 and went, I can't do that. I don't have time to do that. So I sat there and I decided to take it a stanza or two at a time. So like, don't try and take it all in at once. It doesn't work. It's almost 200 verses. Unless you have a whole Saturday morning or something, I don't recommend trying to take the whole thing on at once. Break it up a little bit, then you can which is kind of just a good rule of thumb with anything you're reading is like break it up a little bit so you can truly sit on the words that you're reading and take a minute to try and understand them. But especially with Psalm 119 because it's so long. I think it is the longest chapter in the entire Bible. So another cool verse is 119 verse 109. Though I constantly take my life in my hands, I will not forget your law. I feel like that's so relatable. It's like, even as a seasoned Christian, the temptation is always there to try and take control of it out of pride or a moment of anxiety or anything like that. You just want to take control of it because we feel secure in control. And so despite that and our constant slip up of trying to like hang on to that control, we do not forget God's law. And in doing that and remembering that, we then are able to eventually release our grip and let him take control again. And this seems this kind of constant cycle. Yay humanity. Another verse that my brain connected to Jesus, but you know, it's kind of a stretch, is verse 133. Direct my footsteps according to your word, let no sin rule over me. And I connected that because in the first verse of John, it refers to Jesus as the Word of God, being with, in the beginning was the Word, referring to Jesus, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so that, and he goes on for a while, like, first section of chapter 1 like that, but this idea of referring to Jesus as the Word of God. And so my brain went, oh, direct me my footsteps according to your word, according to Jesus and how he lived his life and how he told us to live our life, so that no sin, and let no sin rule over me. So again, kind of a stretch, but like the connection my brain made. I made it to Psalm 127, and then verse 1. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. And just the concept of unless God is prevalent and working and very integrally connected in integrally in our lives, the things we are doing, even if they aren't in his name, aren't going to have the same value and that eternal value that we might think they have, unless we bring God into that to help us build this thing, to help us do this thing, because inevitably everything we do needs to be for him. Another connection my brain made to Jesus, he himself will redeem Israel from all their sins, which is not that, like, doesn't directly point to Jesus because, you know, yeah, but that's how he did it, was through Jesus. So, and then we have Psalm 139, which I could just quote the entire thing, and that would be my rant about it, because it's so good, and it's it's really the heart of my or at least part of it is like the heart of my argument against transgenderism, because it's an entire section from verse 13 to verse 18, and it is just going on about how intentionally and personally God was involved, that's the word I'm looking for, involved with our creation, and how well he knows us, and just how much he, in a reiteration of God not making mistakes, how wonderful his works are, and it's very, very good. And I might read that section, but there's also other sections about how God is always with us, and how even in, it's like he knows everything about us because he is everywhere. We can't go anywhere to flee from his presence, because even the darkness is as light to him. And we'll hit the main things. So 139 verse 8, if I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. It goes on for like that till verse 12, and then we'll read verse 13 to 18, because that is the core of like when people talked about transgenderism, and it's just like, God doesn't say anything about that. My brain went, these specific verses. I didn't remember the reference at the exact moment, but anytime anyone even tries to, anyway, this is where my brain goes. Verse 13 to 18. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. And 17 and 18 tie in because with a little footnote with like in a little, they had two words in another translation that I don't know why they're not in NIV, but I love the addition of them. And it goes back to 17, goes, how amazing are your thoughts concerning me, God. How vast is the sum of them. And then in verse 18, were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. And those verses are such a huge declaration of who we are in God, and how intentionally and how personally and he is connected to us, how invested and loving he is invested in us, and how much he does love us. Phrasing. And it's so cool to see it written out in such a very eloquent and clear way. And I'm working on memorizing the entirety of Psalm 139. I'm not as disciplined in doing it as I should be, but I am working on it. A lot of the verses that I know of but didn't necessarily know the reference of from Psalms are in this one. So that helps. Like you search me, Lord, you know me, you know when I sit, when I rise, and that whole section, I knew that one, but didn't know the reference. I knew that you knit me together in my mother's womb section, like a bunch of the verses from that section, but didn't know the reference. So yeah, we'll get there. I can at least quote the general idea and most of the verses, not necessarily in order and not necessarily exactly the same way it's written, but I'm getting there. Psalm 142 verse 3, when my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who watch over my way. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare for me. And the first half is really what I hang on to, because it's, again, a reminder of that daily need for God, and gives a reason why when you grow spiritually exhausted, he is the one there that helps carry you through that, which we all have those times and we all have those moments, because life is crazy and the world is nuts, and it's sometimes very, very difficult to hang on to everything. And yeah, so I do really enjoy the verse, and that, again, that reminder of our daily need for God. And then Psalm 146, 7-9 it's talking about the power of God and how God helps the oppressed, and a lot of it is just lining up with what Jesus did while he was on earth. So that was really cool. So in 7-9 it goes, he upholds the cause of the oppressed. He gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the ways of the wicked. And it's we love reading through the Psalms with the hindsight of the Gospels and seeing how it connects and how it lines up in parallels of what Jesus did while he was on earth, because he went to the oppressed. He gave food to the hungry. He freed people from not necessarily physical prison, but the prison of their sin and the prison of their afflictions. He gave sight to the blind. He lifted up the bowed down, which I go back to the prostitute woman, where we have the whole he who has not sinned throw the first stone, and then he lifts her up and goes, go sin no more, I don't condemn you. That's where my brain went with that. Watches over the foreigner. He goes to like the Samaritans and the people that the Jews were like, no, what the heck, why? And obviously, it goes to the fatherless, the widow, all of that, and frustrates the ways of the wicked. And that brings me to like the Pharisees and the people who were so frustrated and so offended by all of these things that he was doing and refused to believe that he was the Messiah they were waiting for, despite all of the fulfilled prophecies and all of the signs and wonders and all of that. They refused to believe because in their hearts they were so legalistic and leaning so hard into their interpretations and their traditions and all that they had created and added and built upon God's holy law, that they were frustrated and offended and annoyed by Jesus, and to the point where they eventually then crucified him. So I love how that basically outlines what Jesus did while he was on earth. It's very cool. And we'll end it with a few of the declarations of Jesus' identity from these last couple Psalms, because I don't have anything to rant about anymore. So Psalm 147, verse 4, he determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name. Verse 8, he covers the sky with clouds. He supplies the earth with rain and makes grass grow on the hills. 16, he spread snow like wool and scattered the frost like ashes. Psalm 148, verse 5 and 6, let them praise the name of the Lord, for at his command they were created, and he established them forever and ever. He issued a decree that will never pass away. We did it. That is all 150 of the Psalms. Again, I really enjoyed reading through the Psalms. It was a joy and a convicting time, honestly, as I read through some of those, and it's so good. It's one of those books I feel like that gets overlooked a little bit. Like everyone's like, oh, the Psalms, whatever. It's like it's a very commonly known, a commonly known book of the Bible, but it's not. I feel like it's underestimated for its spiritual value. A lot of people are just like, oh, like best books of the Bible. A lot of times, like they turn the Gospels and the New Testament books. They're almost held high. Like the New Testament in itself is almost held higher than the Old Testament, just because it has like the Gospels, and then we have Paul, who's just, he was really good at writing, and his letters are great. So it's almost held higher, and it's almost seen as more relevant than the Old Testament, which is part of it. And then even among the Old Testament, I feel like the Psalms is not necessarily the most I don't know what word I'm looking for, but I feel like the Psalms gets underestimated for its like its spiritual value. I don't know, in the way the prayers that David and the other authors lay out for the declarations of Jesus' character, or not Jesus necessarily, but like God's character, for the number of connections to Jesus that there actually are, whether I'm reading too far into those verses or not. But there's so much in there, and I feel like that gets overlooked. Like the Psalms is just like, it's looked at as, oh, it's the longest book of the Bible. It has the most chapters. It has the longest chapter in the Bible, and it, you know, all of that. But I never really hear about all of the cool things that are actually in the Psalms. So I highly recommend it. I will be singing the praises of the book of Psalms for probably like the rest of my life. It was so good. No pun intended with the anyway. Yes, I really enjoyed the Psalms. I highly recommend it, reading through it, whether it's just like a little addition to your normal biblical Bible reading, because a lot of the Psalms have really short chapters actually, so you can read through one super fast. One of them is literally 2 verses long, but it's just so good to read through, and the amount of raw emotion that happens in the Psalms, and just the way the wording is, like the amount of surrender that is illustrated through like David and so's words in these poems, songs, psalms, all of that. It's so good, and it's wonderful illustrations. It's wonderful declarations of who God is, who we are in God, of his power and all of that. It's so good, and I can't recommend it enough. So just go read Psalms, please. It's so good. But those are my thoughts on the Psalms. We finally finished them up, and now I have, the next video is going to be like almost all of the Old Testament prophets, because I just started at Joel and kept going to the end of the Old Testament. So the next one will probably just be me going off about all of the Old Testament prophets, or almost all of them. Anyway, until then, those are my thoughts on Psalms. Feel free to drop yours in the comments as well. I would love to continue the discussion. I'll see you all next time.